Hi everyone, happy Diwali, and I hope you can see me and hear me. If you can, just put it in the comments so I can start with the session for today. Super excited about the launch of my second podcast. So, once I get a heads up, I'm gonna be starting my session for today. So I can see there are 17 people who have already logged in. I'll appreciate if perfect. Mrugank Vyas, thank you for joining in. So thank you all of you all for joining me today. Devin, Mrugank, I can see a lot of people already. Uh, Izzy, thank you so much. So to begin with, very happy Diwali to all of you all from India to the entire globe. I am Dr. Mayur Davda and I'm here to announce the launch of my second podcast, which is by the name of Dental Photography School, and which is the world's only podcast dedicated to clinical photography and general photography as well. I'm super proud to launch this as we talk. So the podcast is now available on all podcasting platforms like Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, Spotify, and you can check out the podcast on my website as well. That is dentalphotographyschool.in. And this podcast is going to be covering everything about clinical photography, and it can be heard or listened to by anybody, be it a practitioner, be it a student, or even your front office desk, because I'm going to keep things really very simple and it's accessible, it's free. I'm going to be launching one episode every Saturday, and I am super duper excited about this new venture, that is the Dental Photography School podcast. All right, so let us start off with today's event with a bang. Once again, welcome to all of you all to the Dental Photography School podcast launch event. And if you want to check it out, you can go to my website, that's dentalphotographyschool.in. All right. So I'm just going to keep a ticker on so that people who are joining us a little later can appreciate what we are talking about. So my first session for today, that's the one right now, is going to be on how to decide your camera for clinical photography. All right, so let me just share my screen so you will be able to see my screen, right? I hope you can see my screen. And let's start off immediately. All right. Okay. So the session that you're attending right now is about which is the best camera for clinical photography, where I will be sharing my thoughts on how I would decide which is the best camera for me. Okay, so this is going to be like an half an hour thing or a 30 minutes thing. And if there are any questions, I'm going to be taking it up in the end. So welcome to the first episode of the Dental Photography School podcast. This episode is about how you would decide, or how I can help you decide which is the best camera for us in clinical photography. All right. So let me divide this session into two parts. One is the essential requirements or a wish list, that is what all should be there in a camera which we want for clinical photography, be it dental photography, dermatology, or ophthalmic photography. What are the basic things that are needed in our camera? And the next section would be what are the add-on wish list, in the sense, if you want to use the camera for general portraits, or if you want to use the camera for outdoor photography, wildlife photography. We'll be speaking about all that in that section. So let me begin with what are the essentials or the essential requirements that we need in our camera. All right. Usually, the first question that you might be having is, which is the best company for us to invest on for clinical photography? All right. So I would suggest that you can do your own research, but you can listen to others, you can do your own research, but ultimately you can buy what you think is correct, because everybody's individual needs might be really different. So let's just do one thing. Let's round up on the practical aspects that are going to be affecting us in our clinical photography, and then let us round up on the company which is the best suitable for our clinical requirement needs. All right. So what all can we expect from a good camera? For if you are a dentist and if you are listening to this, you need to understand that dental photography, or in fact, maybe I can even summarize and say that any form of clinical photography, be it dermatology photography or ophthalmic photography, is largely dependent on the flash. So I know this session is about how do we round up on the camera, but my personal opinion for all of you would be round up on what you want to see in your pictures first. And this is really easy for us in photography because you might have seen those results in others' pictures, right? So just round up on what kind of images you want for clinical photography. For instance, if you see on the image on your left hand side, if you use a ring flash, you're going to get a large amount of reflections. So you can see different flash sources and different pictures of those in the image on the left. So you need to finalize what kind of image are you looking out for. So you need to understand, or you need to decide on what is the kind of end result you want from your photographic documentation. So if you're okay with a large amount of reflections that are seen on your subject, like you can see on the top left image, where I have used a ring flash, then it's completely fine. That's your personal choice. So if you're okay with the reflections, go ahead and buy a ring flash. But if you're into aesthetics and if you do a lot of anti-aesthetic restorations, you need to control the reflections that are coming on your pictures, right? So if you want to control those pictures, if you want to control those reflections on the teeth or on your subject, just generally, you need to have a twin flash, because that gives you much more flexibility with respect to where the light is going to be falling on your subject. And the last option is you use studio lights if you are doing a lot of glamour stuff in your clinical practice, and basically if you just want to be famous. So there's a chart on the right hand side that you can see, I'm sure. So this is what I suggest all my delegates, and it's out and open right now for all of you all to understand. If you're a dentist and if you're doing anterior aesthetic cases for publication, twin flash might be a great option for you. Okay. But that does not mean that you cannot use a ring flash for anterior aesthetic cases. It's just that twin flash might be better if you are good with it, if you know how to use it properly. But if you want to do anterior aesthetic cases for for publicity, in the sense to get famous, you should probably use a studio light, because that's what catches a lot of us attention on social media platforms like Instagram and stuff like that. Okay. But if you're into a lot of full mouth rehabilitations and a lot of posterior cases, I personally think a ring flash is a great option for you, because it makes everything so much more simpler. Ring flashes are much more easier to handle. But if you're doing posterior cases or full mouth rehab cases to get famous on Instagram, again, studio light is a great option, provided you know how to use it. So you can round up on any flash of your choice. But just keep in mind, you have to start off with the end result in mind. So that's one thing that I keep on repeating, and I make sure that my delegates or the listeners understand it very clearly. So why are we talking about flashes now in this session when we are talking about cameras? So this is the reason why. Okay, because we're going to be rounding up on a camera company first. All right. So what is a camera that is fit for us in clinical photography? Number one, I personally think that the camera company should be capable of manufacturing a lens which does not have image stabilization. In other terms, it's also called as vibration reduction. Okay, that's because of the light source. So in clinical photography, or let's say in dental photography, Dental photography is equal to flash photography, and I cannot stress the importance of this statement enough. Okay, so flash is the most important equipment for us, and very honestly, what camera you have does not really matter a lot in clinical photography, and in fact, to a certain extent, even in general photography as well. So I would be looking for a camera for clinical photography from a company which makes a long list of lenses and accessories. And I would be specific in saying that I would prefer a macro lens over here, but one without image stabilization. So that would be my primary criteria of rounding up on the company. So we basically have three top companies, namely Canon, Nikon, and Sony. So I would be looking at which company is making a lens, macro lens to be more specific, without image stabilization, because that's the right lens for us when we are doing clinical photography using a flash. Okay, so since we are talking about flash, and we already discussed there are two types of flashes, and I would probably want to round up on a company that makes both the flashes, in the sense my company should be capable of making a ring flash as well as a twin flash by itself, because I would probably want to buy everything from under one company just to be on the safer side, so that everything works well in sync, well in synchronization. So um, I want a company which makes both twin flash as well as a ring flash. Okay, so no company makes a studio light on its own. No camera company makes a studio lights on its own. So that will definitely be a third party investment. But the other thing, and probably the most important thing that I would be looking out for, is support. So if something goes wrong with my equipment, I would definitely be going back to my company for a service. So I would be looking out for companies that offer great service center and very quick over-the-counter servicing, if that's possible, which is definitely possible in urban areas. But in rural areas, you need to figure out what is the company or the service center that's closest to you, which is the support center that's closest to you, and probably decide on that camera for yourself. And I cannot tell you, that means in that case, what is the best investment for you. But for me, I know what is the best investment, and these three are the top reasons for me to decide actually what is going to be the camera of my choice. And obviously, countries like India are very price sensitive markets, and we always think about saving a little bit of money if we can. So, definitely, economics is something that we take into account almost as our first priority. And we set a budget for ourselves, and then we decide on the camera, right? So, basically, what I'm saying is, I'm going to be rounding up on the camera company which has a lens which is non-image stabilization lens, means in the sense it has a macro lens without image stabilization. It should be capable of making both ring flash as well as twin flash. It should be giving me great support, that's after sales support, and it should be economic as well. Okay, so let us see what do we have in store when it comes to camera companies. All right, so we have top three companies that are really very famous when it comes to camera manufacturing, and there is no doubt those three companies are Canon, which is on top, Nikon, which is on top again, and Sony is coming up quite great. So we also have other companies like Panasonic and Fuji and many other companies actually, which I would probably not want to invest on, because I would probably be doubting on the amount of accessories that I can get from those companies. So not only my camera lens or flash is important, but what are the accessories? Am I going to be able to easily get them? That is also one question that you need to ask themselves. So considering the previous four important vital headliners that we discussed with respect to lens, flash, and support and economics, let us see what do these individual companies have for us to offer in store for us. All right. So when it comes to lenses, I'm looking out for a macro lens without image stabilization. To be more specific, I want that macro lens without image stabilization in the focal length of 85 mm to 105 mm. Okay, so what are the companies that give me a macro lens in focal length of 85 to 105 without image stabilization? And I can see or round up on only one company over here, and that is the Canon. So Canon makes a 100 mm macro lens without image stabilization. So why I'm constantly stressing on without image stabilization is because image stabilization is not needed when we do flash photography. So please try and note that down somewhere, because blurring will not be seen when you're using flash. And in clinical photography, we want all our pictures flash. So to be on the safer side, flash photography is the best. Immaterial if you're a dentist, a dermatologist, or an ophthalmologist. Okay. One more reason why I want to use flash is because I prefer to work on high F numbers. We're going to be discussing settings in detail in our forthcoming episodes, so don't get worked up on this. But we want a setting like F number, or also called as the aperture, set on the higher values so that I can get a deeper depth of field. So if I want everything sharp with a deeper depth of field, I have to use a ring flash or a twin flash. Okay. And if I'm going to be using flash, I repeat, I do not need a lens with image stabilization. So I'm going to be saving money over there and buy a lens without image stabilization. One more reason why I stress a lot on a lens without image stabilization is, whenever there is image stabilization in a lens, be it any company, say Canon, Nikon, or any other company, basically you're adding one more motor, or one more element into the lens, which is going to make the lens very heavy. And for clinical photography, especially in dentistry, we do tend to use our equipment with one hand only. That's because the second hand is either doing retraction or holding a mirror or a contraster. So I want my equipment to be super light, and that's going to be possible only and only if I use a lens without image stabilization and not with image stabilization. So do take that into account and decide on your company. But for me, it's going to be Canon, because that's the only company that makes a great camera and a lens, a macro lens in the range of 100 mm focal length without image stabilization. All right. So pardon me for the lot of noise that's coming from the background, because it's Diwali. I'm trying to be as loud as possible out here, but I hope you can hear me pretty well. All right. So let me get back to my presentation again. So we already saw all this, and we are talking about which is the best camera that's fit for us in clinical photography, and we discussed about lenses. Now coming to the next point, that is about flashes. So which is the company that makes both ring flash and twin flash? That will be my next question, because our clinical photography is largely, in fact, 70 or 80% of our result is going to be controlled by the flash. Okay. So which is the company that makes a ring flash and a twin flash both? And the answer is quite simple. Canon. It makes a super awesome ring flash by the name of MR14EX2, and its twin flash is called MT26EX. Whereas Nikon just makes a twin flash, and that is called as R1C1. So that's quite a disappointment. If I want to buy a ring flash, I have to depend upon a third party flash, which is not a great thing for a company like Nikon. And Sony, I'm really doubtful if they make any of the creative flashes. I'm sure they do, but I haven't heard of anyone using Sony's ring flash or Sony twin flash. I think they make a twin flash, but what about the after sales service, and how many units are being sold in your city or even in your country? You need to keep that into account, because if there are very less pieces sold in where you're staying, it's going to be really difficult to get hands on the service center, right? And to get support, after sales support. So I'm never going to be depending on Sony for that, for sure, because apart from speed lights, I have personally never met anybody who's using Sony's twin flash, and I don't think they make a ring flash at the first place. Okay, so that answers about the lens and the flash. And now we come to after sales support. I'm sure all the companies are going to give you great after sales support if you're living in a city like Mumbai, Delhi, or maybe Paris or New York or Washington. But what about the two-tier cities? When you go deeper into the countryside, in rural areas, you need to check out what is best for you and round up on that particular company. But I believe that all the three top companies are great at giving after sales service. So a tie definitely over here for all the companies. And the last thing is economics. Um, so I personally believe that Canon makes pretty economic stuff when it comes to clinical photography. Um, but if I speak about Nikon and Sony, Sony makes super expensive stuff because they are mostly into mirrorless camera market and they are pretty expensive at this point of time. I would probably start recommending mirrorless cameras a little later, not for now, because mirrorless cameras do not have a wide range of lenses to be used on at the present moment, especially the lens that we want to use. So in clinical photography, because we do not want any sort of distortion, we prefer a focal length of around 85 to 105 mm, as discussed earlier, and they have to be macro lenses. All right. Since we are talking about economics, you need to understand this very clearly. So Nikon does make a 105 mm macro lens, but it is super duper expensive. Sony also makes a 90 mm macro lens, but it's for an A mount as far as I know it. And the A mount of Sony is practically dead. I would say it's going. So I'm definitely not going to be using the 90 mm A mount of Sony macro lens. And the problem with Nikon and Sony both over here is that both their macro lenses are super expensive. If you are an Indian, because I'm going to be giving about the I'm going to be giving out the cost in Indian rupees. As far as I checked it out, the Nikon 105 mm macro lens is around 68,000 rupees, and so is the 90 mm macro lens by Sony, around 65 to 68,000 rupees. All right, so that's huge. So what do we get in that same amount in Canon? That's the question that you need to ask. So in that same amount, say around 68 to 70,000 rupees in Canon, you can buy an entry-level DSLR, which is more than enough for any clinical photography, and a 100 mm macro lens non-IS version. So basically what I'm trying to tell you is, in the cost of one Nikon 105 mm macro lens or in the cost of one Sony 90 mm macro lens, you get to buy a Canon macro lens as well as a camera with an 1855 lens. So in 70,000 rupees, you get one camera and two lenses. That's 1855 mm kit lens and a 105 mm macro lens without image stabilization. Whereas in 70,000 rupees in Nikon or Sony, you would just get a macro lens and that cost. No camera, no body, nothing. No kit lens either. So if economics is tight, I think we need to round up on the company that's called Canon, and the result is quite clear. So I'm bending a lot towards Canon because number one, it makes a macro lens that's in the 100 mm length, 100 mm focal length range without image stabilization. So Canon makes a 100 mm macro lens without image stabilization, which Nikon does not and Sony does not. So the winner over here is Canon. Canon makes both twin flash and ring flash. So again, the winner over here is Canon. The after sales support is great for all three companies. But again, since because of the previous two criterias, my decision is bending towards Canon. And about the economics, definitely Canon is the winner out there because in 70,000 Indian rupees, you get a camera with a kit lens, that's 1855 lens, and a 100 mm macro lens without image stabilization, which is the gold standard for photography. All right. So, yeah. So I hope that helps you decide on what is the best for you. And we proceed to our next slide. What you can do is probably you can take a screenshot of this if you want so that it helps you. And for our podcast listeners, I'm going to be cutting this off because this is going to be going on a podcast as well. Okay. So my basic roundup has come to Canon, most definitely. And I am pretty happy with it because I am a huge believer in Canon. It's not that I do not have Nikon, I do have Nikon as well. In fact, I have Nikon camera, Nikon lens, and a Nikon twin flash as well. I probably want to specify this right now, and I'll repeat it once again in our session on flash, that the twin flash by Nikon, that's R1C1, works on a completely different set of batteries that's called CR123. And they are difficult to get hands on in cities like Mumbai itself. and rechargeable options are very, very rare. So if you want a rechargeable option for CR123, you might have to import it from US or any other country. So this is also one reason why I would not go for Nikon, because the twin flash is R1C1, which is weird, um, and it works on CR123 batteries. And suppose if I lose out on my battery power suddenly, I'm not going to be finding CR123 over the counter in any shop. I have to go to a specific shop to buy it, if that is practically available in my city. So there's a huge problem with those batteries. So you need to consider that. I'll be repeating that in the flash part as well. So I've definitely rounded up on my company for sure. I don't know about you, but I'm definitely going in for Canon because of the reasons discussed earlier. Now I have to round up on a camera model that's best for me. So what all do I take into consideration before deciding the camera model, right? So the first thing that I would probably want is my camera should be light in weight. That's because I'm a dentist, and I'm sure even other clinicians like dermatologists or ophthalmologists, or maybe if you are in facial aesthetics, nobody would want a camera that's really heavy and difficult to use, especially in dental photography and dentistry. We have to do cheek retraction. I'm sure your staff can do that, but we have to do the adjustments. And I frequently tend to use the camera with a single hand, because it's only me who's going to be holding the mirror, right? And 90% of dental photography intraoral is probably mirror images. So I need to invest on equipment which is light in weight. So which is the camera that's light in weight? So basically there are two types of DSLRs. One is a crop sensor DSLR and one is a full frame DSLR. And a crop sensor DSLR is not only more economic but much more light in weight. So I'm going to be going or shifting towards Canon crop sensor DSLRs, and I'm not going to be investing on a full frame DSLR because I'm going to be using my camera with a single hand. So my first criteria was my camera should be light in weight. And my second criteria is, although I might not use inbuilt flash for photography, for clinical photography, I would still want to have it as a backup, because just in case when I'm using my studio lights for glamour photography or for good portraits, and if my trigger battery goes off, my inbuilt flash can act as a master in triggering my studio lights, which is a must have feature for me. So I am bending even more towards the crop sensor camera in Canon, not towards the full frame, because most of the camera companies do not make full frame cameras which have inbuilt flash. They do not have inbuilt flash. Okay, so you have to depend upon an external flash like ring flash, twin flash, or a studio light. So I agree over here that although I'm going to be using ring flash or twin flash, I would still prefer to buy a camera which has inbuilt flash, just in case if my trigger goes off, or my or my ring flash or my twin flash batteries goes off, so I can still use inbuilt flash of the camera. Okay, so again, my decision is towards a crop sensor camera out here. And one of the most important criteria for me would be my camera should be able to accept a third party flash, because I do a lot of studio light photography in my clinical practice as well. So if you want pictures for your website, instead of downloading it, you can make those pictures on your own. And the best gadget for that is studio light. So if you are doing a lot of aesthetic dentistry, if you are doing a lot of facial aesthetics in your dermatological practice, or if you're taking a lot of portraits or even body parts. So I've seen a lot of dermatologists take pictures of the full hand or the entire hip region or the abdomen. So what's going to make our lives really simple over here is a studio light, because the flash is really powerful, the light is really powerful. And the best part of using a flash or a studio light is our images do not get affected by the ambient lighting of our room as much. So definitely I'm going to be looking for a camera that accepts a third party flash, specifically because I'm going to be using studio lights quite a lot in my clinical practice. All right. And one of the reasons why I prefer crop sensor DSLR is because they are very easy to use. Now, coming to the last criteria that will help me round up on my camera choice is the presence of Wi-Fi or NFC or Bluetooth in my camera, because it's going to make it a lot more easy for me to just take a picture and educate my patient or the guardian or anybody else by putting the image on a big screen, say a smart TV or an Android TV. And how is that possible? That's possible if our camera has Wi-Fi, NFC, or Bluetooth. Okay, most importantly, Wi-Fi. So I need to emphasize over here that I do not literally transfer pictures from my camera to my TV or my phone or any Android device or an iOS device. It's just to educate my patients. It's just for that moment, because an image that's been shot with a DSLR is very heavy, because it's very high resolution. Even the basic cameras give us a very high resolution, and I love to shoot on RAW for a lot of reasons. We're going to be discussing that as well in our forthcoming episodes. But you need to be using Wi-Fi, NFC, and Bluetooth just for patient education purposes. In the sense, you take a picture and just show it to them on a big screen so that they can really understand the line of treatment that we are offering to them, or they can also see the effect of our treatment that's already taking place. But this is not the way we actually transfer our main files. So our main files are still transferred by inserting the SD card or any other card, say CF card, into your laptop or a memory card reader, and then transfer the pictures over the laptop like that. Or maybe if you want to connect the camera directly to the laptop, you can, but I don't usually recommend that. But transferring images through Wi-Fi on your TV or Android or iOS device is not really recommended, because what actually goes on the Android or the iOS device is a small JPEG image of what we have just shot. All right, so keep in mind that Wi-Fi is only needed for patient education for that particular moment. That's all. It's not basically for file transfers. All right. So let me round up on the top 4 points that I'm going to be considering before buying, or rounding up on the camera model for Canon. All right. So my camera has to be light in weight. It should have an inbuilt flash. So these two factors are making my decision bend towards crop sensor DSLRs. My camera should be capable of accepting a third-party flash, and it should also have inbuilt Wi-Fi in it. Now, least assured, most of the newer cameras are going to have Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, or in fact even NFC. So you don't really have to worry about that. But what you really need to worry about is the third party. Is your camera compatible with a third party flash? So that's one thing that you need to always keep in mind whenever you're buying your camera. Obviously, whenever your decision is bending towards a crop sensor DSLR, crop sensor DSLRs are much more economic as compared to full frame, which is something that I do not recommend. So why I do not recommend a full frame camera is because they are expensive, they are heavy, they are difficult to use, maybe because there are a lot of settings. I use a full frame, but the reason for me using a full frame is because I do sell my pictures as well. So I would not recommend a full frame camera to anybody unless you want to do professional photography as well. So go for a full frame only if you're going to earn money out of your photography and not otherwise, because full frame is going to give you prints which are almost as big as the size of a billboard, which is something that you really do not want when you are doing clinical photography just for yourself or for publication purposes. You're not going to be printing billboards of your clinical pictures. But if you want to, only then you can go for a full frame DSLR. That's the only requirement. Or if your client requires it. Since I do cater to my clients, I have a full frame and I do it. But I wouldn't if I were just doing clinical photography or a little bit of clinical photography and wildlife photography and general photography. Until you're not earning out of your photography, do not buy a full frame DSLR. This is my personal opinion. So what is my camera verdict, or what camera models do I recommend? Okay, so if you want to have mental peace about the third party flash compatibility, I would suggest Canon 800D, which is currently available. Or if you have access to Canon 1300D, which is an outdated model but which is a great model, go ahead and buy it if it's available for you. Um, Maybe you might get the Canon 1300D with an 1855 and a 55 250 lens. But if it's available, go ahead and buy it, because you don't have to worry about the third party flash compatibility, because most definitely the third party flash is going to work on both these cameras. All right. So my personal choice for daily documentation and a little bit of general outdoor photography would be Canon 800D and Canon 1300D. 1300D is an outdated model, but it's a great model. Go ahead and buy it without thinking twice about it. All right. Um, but the current model, which is the successor of 1500D, 1300D, is called 1500D. You need to exhibit a little bit of caution before you invest on this model. So although I have authentic news coming in from Canon itself that it's the newer 1500D models from around May June 2020 are capable of accepting a third party flash, but I would still recommend that you buy 1500D only after trying out a third party flash on it. And the third party flash has to work on the manual mode, not on the ETTL mode. So if you want to buy cameras like 1500D or 200D, number one, you get a third party flash from someone, just borrow it from a friend, or maybe even you can buy a third party flash beforehand itself. Put the third party flash on manual mode and then mount it on the 1500D camera from the shop where you're planning to buy it from, and check if the flash is firing and you're getting good pictures. Only then go ahead and buy 1500D, 200D, or 250D. That is the word of caution. But if you want to be mentally free, that everything works fine, just go ahead and go for 800D, Canon 800D. That's my choice, just to be on the safer side. Okay, but I'm not saying no to 1500D and 200D. It's just that you have to check before you buy. Although the company says that you can put a third-party flash. Okay. So the basic features of 1500D or 1300D or 800D basically remain the same. There are hardly any differences between these models when it comes to image quality. Most of the cameras might give you around 18 megapixel to 24 megapixel or even higher. I'm not going to be talking about Nikon, because we already discussed that Nikon does not make a macro lens in the 85 to 105 category without image stabilization. So obviously we've decided on the camera company first, and now we are rounding up on the camera, and now we are rounding up on the crop sensor camera. So basically, till if you want to know about the cameras, the nomenclature is like this: bigger the camera, it's more entry level, more basic. So 3000D, 4000D, then 2000D are the most basic ones. Then it's 1500D, 1300D. A little bit higher version would be 800D, and a little bit more higher would be 80D or 90D. And the full frame starts from 6D onwards. Okay, so smaller the number, more professional the camera. That's how you can put it. But till the level, so when you're talking about 3000D, 4000D, 2000D, or 1500D or 800D, till around 800D, the features almost remain the same. So which are the important features that I'm talking about which are the same? One is the resolution, which is almost the same. You don't have to worry. It might be around 18 megapixels to maybe even 35 to 40 megapixels, but that's not really a criteria for rounding up on the camera. It is basically a marketing gimmick. More megapixels does not mean that your camera is great. The sensor size and the processor decides that. So most of the crop sensor DSLRs that I just spoke about, that's 800D, 1300D, 1500D, have almost the same kind of features when we are talking about the heart of the camera. That is, the megapixels are almost the same. The processors might be the same. The autofocusing points might differ from 9 points to 45 points, but these are not really the most important things. But what is more important is all of them have inbuilt Wi-Fi. The newer models, all of them have inbuilt Wi-Fi, and basic resolution is more than enough. Okay. Okay, so one more thing that I want to specify over here is there's something called as a vari angle screen or a flip screen that is not really a great requirement for us in clinical photography in any which ways, and I'm going to be stressing about it a lot more in the forthcoming slides. Okay, so basic requirements are over. So I would probably want a camera which is Canon crop sensor with basic criterias that are met, like light and weight, a good amount of resolution, inbuilt flash should be there, third party acceptance should be there, and Wi-Fi has to be there. So those are my basic criteria. And now we are moving on to the add-on wish list, in the sense if you want to do a little bit of wildlife photography or general outdoor photography, what are the features that you'd probably want in your camera, right? So when you want a camera for wildlife, one of the most important things that I'm probably thinking about is the frames per second that my camera has to offer. In the sense, if I'm shooting on a multi-burst mode, especially if my subject is running or flying, which is quite a possibility in wildlife photography, the feature that I'm going to be looking out and stressing a lot on is the frames per second. So that means in 1 second, how many pictures can you take by you in the multi-burst mode? So you need to focus on that particular feature. And I have rounded up on a couple of camera models. Again, it's Canon itself, because if you want to do a little bit of wildlife photography and clinical photography, we stick to Canon out here because of the ahead mentioned or before mentioned reasons. All right. So 90D and 80D would be a great choice for you because it offers a decent frames per second that's around 10 to 11 or maybe even more. You just need to check it out, but I think it's around 10 to 11 frames per second, which is pretty decent. That means 11 images in 1 second, which is great. All right. Apart from that, Canon 90D and 80D also offer a feature which is great for time lapse, and a lot of my students do a lot of time lapse. For example, I have one of the students, Aditya Gupta from Delhi. He loves doing time lapse photography, and the reason why he selected 80D was he wanted to get into time lapse photography big time. So if you want to do wildlife photography or time lapses, 80D and 90D is a great option. All right. But if you want to do any other form of photography like food photography or just outdoor portraits, I think 800D, 1300D or 1500D would be still great for that purpose. Okay. And now we move on to microscope. So what if you want to have a camera which you want to mount on the microscope? Number one, it has to be light in weight. And number two, since it's going to be on the microscope, we cannot use a flash. All right. So even if you use inbuilt flash, it's not going to be reaching out to your subject because it might be blocked by your microscope itself. So what am I looking at if I want a camera for microscope photography? I would probably be looking at a feature called as ISO, because more the amount of ISO, I'm going to be getting a lot of noise, but that's going to be less noise if your camera is particularly good at it. So which are the cameras that do not give noise even if you use them on high ISO? So now I am switching over to the mirrorless category. So for microscope, yes, I do recommend mirrorless quite a bit because the full frame mirrorless cameras are capable of giving us a great output even though we are on high ISO. So the most popular cameras out here for microscope photography would be Canon EOS R5, which is a recent launch by Canon, which is a full frame